exciting is that? Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Happy Founders Day. Or NewSweden Day. Which do you prefer?
I prefer NewSweden.
Okay, so there's disagreement. That's okay. Both are good. Founders Day?
NewSweden Founders Day.
NewSweden Founders Day. That's accurate, at least. Well, I'm glad to see you guys all here. It's a bit windy, but we're very sheltered here, which makes it kind of nice. I always enjoy on Founders Day meeting down by the monument because it's just very special. It's very special, and I think a lot of people, if they just came and visited the museum, wouldn't even know it was here. You know, and it's just an important place. I used to walk my kids down here, well, I still do, the little ones, you know, and just show them around it and tell them about those brave people that they're the reason all of us are here. You know, if they hadn't have come, we wouldn't have had the successful colony that we're the grandchildren or great-grandchildren of now. The Historical Society, is technically the sons and daughters of the colony. That's its official name still. But I think we're a little bit past that now. I don't know if that many of us are the sons and daughters of the colony anymore, but I think it's really special that we're still close enough, that it's still young enough that we have so many stories, and that we're able to maintain so many buildings that we get to see, the Osland House, the Linston Stuga, so many special things. So anyway, I'm really glad to see you guys here. I picked out a couple Swedish hymns for us to share together, and we have John Hedman to share with us. I always enjoy what he has to say. And then we're going to plant, if you brought any plants, we're going to plant them along the walkway to make it even more beautiful in the future. And then we'll share some food. So, do you guys want to do day by day first?
Yes, sure.
Okay, I'm not going to stand near the microphone when we do this.
Strength I find to meet my trials here, trusting in my Father's wise bestowment. I've no cause for worry or for fear. He whose heart is kind beyond measure gives unto each day what he deems best. Lovingly is part of pain and pleasure, mingling pure with peace and rest. Every day the Lord himself is near me, with a special mercy for each hour. All my cares he fain would bear and cheer me, he whose name is Counselor and Power. The protection of his child and treasure is a charge that on himself he laid. As thy days, thy strength shall be in measure. This the pledge to me he made. Help me then in every situation, so to trust thy promises, O Lord, that I lose not thy sweet consolation, offered me within thy holy word. Help me, Lord, when toil and trouble meeting, care to take as from a Father's hand. One by one the days, the moments fleeting, till I reach the promised land.
spot to open us with prayer?
Sure. Father, we come today thankful for the people who came here so long ago, Lord, over 150 years ago. We're thankful for them and for the seeds they planted and for the love that they shared. We thank you for their faith, for their courage, for their steadfastness, Lord. We pray today that we might honor their memory, that we might give thanks for them today and remember their lives and what they accomplished, Lord. We thank you for them, and we thank you for this special place. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, John. I don't think you need an introduction.
You're not going to get one.
Nope.
Kindling.
Yeah.
So, we've got a couple
Straggling.
coming down. Guess we have a couple chairs. So I saw Bill when I got here, and he said he was going to record it, so that might mean I'm on my best behavior. That's real pressure, but I'll do my best. So, the only conversation I had with Jessica was a few days ago, and it was brief. Said, could you be here at 11 Thursday? And I said, sure. So it was interesting that in her opening, she talked about sons and daughters and so forth. So you're a mind reader. If I have a title for today, it's Who Were These People? So I actually thought of Jessica because her grandmother, Mildred Hedman Taylor, was my aunt. So that's a couple of generations ago. Your children would be third generation from your grandmother. And Aunt Mildred's father was Eric O. Hedman, my grandfather. I always tell people I come from an old family. Eric O. was born in 1864. My grandfather was born during the Civil War. Of course, I'm not sure what the connection is, but sometimes Swedes have been called slow Swedes, so he didn't get married till he was 34. My father didn't get married till he was 34, and my great-grandfather was somewhere in there too, so that makes us older. So, continuing with that, my great-grandfather, who came here in 1871, was Per Hedman. So I want you to keep track of the generations. The teacher in me says nobody's taking notes, and when they're not, I give quizzes. Okay? So then if we go back, if we started with Jessica's children, what would Per Hedman's title be to them? You got to count. Mildred was third. Would be Eric L. fourth, fifth generation. So this is the only easy question I'm giving you today. How many of you had great-great or great-grandparents that settled here? Great or great-grandparents that settled here. So we have almost half the group. So I'm fourth generation. So many here are third, fourth, fifth generation descendants. So back to the title of Who Were These People? I know most of you know your family history pretty well. So my family arrived the second year in 1871. So I want you to think back to your grandparents, great-grandparents. And next question is, who were they? Were they farmers? Were they a cobbler? Were they a blacksmith? Tell me.
Farmers.
Farmers.
His wife was a seamstress. A lot of them were.
And wife was a seamstress. Anybody else? Storekeeper. Who was Uno's father?
Uno's father was John.
John.
John S.
Yep.
Yeah. And he dug graves here.
He dug graves.
And I understand recently that well, the little school was in this schoolhouse here, and it's very rocky and shaly here.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess he used some dynamite.
Oh,
Get through the earth, and the shale
Oh, yeah.
would land on the schoolhouse roof. And there are stories, and there are stories.
oh, there are. There are. Well, if you ask people digging current graves, the farther up you get, you need the backhoe. But there were no backhoes when they first. So dynamite. Interesting thing there. If you had your grandfathers and great-grandfathers to talk to, I doubt there was any of them that did not use dynamite. And they used dynamite on big boulders. Don't know if I see any close by. But there were boulders like this. If the story is right, this area was covered during the Ice Age 10,000 years ago. And as it scraped along, it dropped some stuff in it. Dropped big boulders. W. Thomas didn't tell the Swedes about that, but that's okay. He couldn't tell them everything. So, again, we had farmers, we had a storekeeper. What else did your grandparents, great-grandparents do? Any blacksmith? There you go. Couldn't have got by without that. So, blacksmith we associate with horseshoes for horses a lot of times, but what else did they do?
Tools.
Tools.
That's right.
Axes. All kinds of metal.
Farm equipment.
Farm equipment, even. Yes. A lot of that. Who else? We had a seamstress, so let's get to the ladies. Who were they? Yeah, there you go. Okay. You're going to shorten my presentation. Okay. True, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've had...
Also, housekeepers, if someone came without a wife or,
Yes.
at that point.
Younger ladies that came throughout the 70s and 80s, it was common for them, 16, 17, 18, to be housekeepers and nannies and what we'd call daycare today. So, but I like June's answer. They did everything. Even if we only go back a generation to our parents, you'd see them in the potato fields, sometimes picking potatoes,
Truck drivers.
sometimes a truck driver. How many of you remember Elna Sodergren? Could roll barrels as good as any man I ever saw. And so they did that. What about haying season? Did they help? Yes. No balers. How did they get the hay in? No hay loaders, no hay balers. Pitchfork. And later on, the first dump rakes, those wide ones, you still see a few around. They had no side delivery rakes to make a windrow. They did in sorts with the dump rake. And then it was pitchfork time, onto a horse and wagon. When I was growing up, my father still did some of that, and we called it loose hay, because you had the balers coming in. So women were out. I have old black and white pictures of women on top of the load. Because if you hauled loose hay, you had to pack it. So there would be 2 or 3 sometimes on the ground with the pitchfork. I did a bunch of that. You had to roll it up with the pitchfork. You rolled it up a few turns and then stabbed it in the middle so that you had a pile like this that you took to the wagon or later on the truck. And so pitching hay was you pitched it onto the wagon. Many of the ladies and men that were building the load would spread that and then do what? I'm dragging you back. They had to pack it. You know what happens to a load of loose hay if you don't pack it? Slides off. Ask my mother. There was some church event at 2 or 3 o'clock, and we were too young, and my father didn't have a hired hand or somebody at the time, so he drafted my mother. And he was pitching fast because it was time to get washed up and get to wherever they were going, so the load didn't get packed too well. So one of the farm roads had a tilt like this, and she was sitting up near, it was on a truck, and the hay slid and she fell off and broke her leg. She was tough, but she didn't make it to the event. She had a few words for my father. I do remember that. So, but yes, what else did the women do? Taught school. How old were they, some of them, when they started teaching school?
Like
16, 17. Yeah. No state of Maine Department of Certification required. Okay. Yeah, they taught school. So while we're on that, how many one-room schools did NewSweden have going at one time? At least 7. I think there were 8. Let's count them a little bit. You know where School Land is? Where a lot of the Landine family? There was one. Why else would you call it School Land? It had to have a school. Okay, there's one. Work your Gemplin School. This one. Thelma Nelson's house. Thelma and Hartley Nelson's house. That's 4. Westmanland. I think I did. Still standing. I go out there once a year and moderate their town meetings in the Westmanland Town Hall now. So we're up to 5. We haven't hit this section. B&A, isn't that building still standing? You go into the village, it's on the left. That's 6. You're getting there. School Land we hit. So we're up to 6.
Anything on West Road or Lebanon?
You know, I scoured my feeble brain and I couldn't come up with a school on West Road, although I thought I was told there was one.
And my mother taught at the one in Lebanon.
Well, there you go. So we're at 7. Madawaska Road, Rista Road, they must have... Okay. Yes. I think you're right. Yes, there was one on East Road. Yes. Yes, there was. So that makes us 9 if we count Westmanland. All taught by women. How many ed techs and support staff did they have?
0.
Yep. How many did they have in the school? 5? 10? 15? This is not an auction. 20?
At least 15.
At least 15.
Depending on where
Sometimes 20 to 30. How many grades? 8. Grades 1 to 8. No preschool, kindergarten. What was the facility like?
outhouses,
Outhouses, meaning no running water.
probably cold.
Cold. Insulation wasn't invented unless you threw something in the walls.
I missed going to this school by 1 year.
Whoa. Wow.
And then they built the new school that's no longer exists.
Yep. Yep. So we have women that were helping on the farm, teaching school, homemakers. did everything at home. I don't want to pick on you guys, but the stories I've heard, the man of the house wasn't much of a housekeeper. Very seldom did they cook unless they were a bachelor. So the wife did all the cooking, gardening, laundry, not a simple task, nursing. Yeah. So women had a full schedule, no question about it. So, moving on a little bit, talking about who were they. We didn't mention all of the trades that men and women did. So who were they? What were some of the other things that the early settlers did? Sometimes as a job, so to speak.
There was a postmaster.
Postmaster. Postmaster started in the 1880s, I believe. That's another good point. I wish I had Hartley Nelson here. If you have Richard Head's book, which many of you do, he did a great section in there about the post offices and postmasters. How many post offices? Gemplin had one.
NewSweden.
NewSweden.
Stockholm had their own.
Stockholm had their own. Post office? I don't think so.
Was it inside
The store? It's possible. So there were at least 3, maybe 4 post offices. Okay. How did the mail get distributed?
Horse and sleigh.
Horse and sleigh. If you were Herman Anderson, you had a special vehicle. How many of you remember Herman? Motorcycle. Not in January. But he delivered mail as often as he could by motorcycle. Before that, it was horse. Okay. Mostly men were the postmasters, although women worked in the post office. I looked at that a little bit, and I don't remember if there were any lady postmistresses. Not sure. Today we have lots, but... Okay, so what other things did these early people do to make a living and get by?
Working in the woods?
Worked in the woods. Many of your ancestors actually went to work in logging camps for part of the winter to supplement their income. And if they did, they left after the fall harvest and planting. Maybe November they took off. And they spent several months away. Travel was not easy, especially from deep in the woods, so many times they stayed in a logging camp. I don't remember Stockholm, Westmanland, Blackstone Siding have had logging camps. But logging camps, if you were many miles into the woods, was enough to house your crew. And they had a whole string of bunk beds on both sides of a room. In many cases, there were no partitions. So you stacked 8 or 10 men on either side. And they ate a lot of beans. Just saying. So it wasn't an easy go. So what else did some of these early people do?
There's a remnant of an old logging camp. You know the road, the dirt road that's above Madawaska Lake? It's off from that because Alton, what's his name? Took us, it's been years, I hadn't thought
Alton
about it.
Wardwell?
Yep, into the camp and showed us you could see where the fires were. There were no buildings at that point, but you could see that there had been human beings
Yeah.
Creative.
Yeah. The on the road that goes into Little Madawaska Lake, there was a camp. If you went in about halfway, I forget which family had that. It wasn't a long ways in the woods, but that was a common practice when the harvest was in and the fall plowing was done. They would take off sometimes for a week. 4, 5, 6 guys. If you look at some of the pictures, they were quite successful. So what else did they do?
There were a lot of shingle mills.
Yes.
Especially like down by the brooks where there was a lot of cedar.
Yep. Yep. You don't see any cedar right here. But yes, cedar shakes, cedar shingles. Yes, June.
Did they ever do anything with cutting ice?
Oh yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah. The ponds, we weren't really close to a lake, but streams that would freeze over, but a lot of ponds. Yes. And that was the beginning of the icebox era. And they had heavy-duty saws. They had to cut a hole to be able to get the saw down in the water, because many times the ice was frozen like that, even like that. And then it was similar to a cross-cut saw, and they would cut a slab, loaded them on wagons with horses, hauled them back. And an ice box was a semi-insulated early refrigerator. That block of ice would last quite a while, so you could put some perishable things in there. And that was an ongoing job in the winter for quite a few people. If you stop and think, if my numbers are right, by 1880 or early 1880s, there were almost 1,000 people here. So there were 200, maybe even 250 households. Now, if they didn't have an ice box, did they take the ice?
Put sawdust.
Put sawdust around it. If they had some kind of wooden box outside, they could put shavings in the bottom, put slab or slabs of ice in there, and cover that with sawdust, and it kept pretty good. So, what else did some of them do? We're getting there.
Well, a lot of people worked for the railroad.
Yep.
Not necessarily by choice, but that was part of the agreement when they came.
Yes. Yes. When did the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad arrive in NewSweden, Maine? I'll give you a hint. It got to Caribou in 1895. 98, 99. They left Caribou, came into the Woodland Township, and then on up to NewSweden. What we refer to as the B&A were the first set of railroad tracks in the town. So I'm going to say 1899, which was revolutionary. That changed a lot of things that they did. Potatoes were a common enough crop early on, but they were not necessarily a money crop. If you stop and think about it, most people grew some potatoes. They could sell some to people who didn't have potatoes, but there was no market outside market. So, my grandfather, Eric O., not long after the railroad arrived in NewSweden, we call them trackside storage. There's a few of them left. They're almost like a barn type structure. And so at one point he had 2 of them. He became a potato buyer and a shipper, and that was very common. So he had to have a crew. We haven't mentioned that. If we're going into 1900 now, what did the crew in the potato house do at the time? Some of you have spent time in a potato house.
Well, the potato cellar was where deep in the ground kept the potatoes cool
Yes.
over the winter, but then they would,
Haul them to the railroad, yeah.
but they had a conveyor, and Daddy had a potato house,
Yep.
among other things, but they would pick out the bad potatoes. They
Right.
would, as they went by the conveyor.
Yep.
Into bags, and then load the boxcars with the potatoes.
If you were shipping potatoes, you had to have a crew that would employ at least 4, sometimes 6 or 7 men. And you mentioned the in-ground potato cellar, which there are still some around. That was on the individual farms. 12 to 14 foot high concrete walls, quite thick. And it was amazing. Green Mountains preceded the Catardans that were so popular. And I don't remember doing much with Green Mountains, but Catardans were a staple. There were many, many farmers that planted Catardans. And they were a round white potato and very solid. So if you had good storage and kept your temperature 34 to 36 degrees, I remember hauling potatoes out of our cellar the middle of June, well after planting, and they had no sprouts. No sprout killers and sprout inhibitors and all of that stuff. So yeah. So back to the trackside potato storage. Any women work there?
Yes.
You mentioned a conveyor with a screen on it. Part of the screen was for sizing, like an 1 7/8 hole to get out what we call the seconds, the smaller ones. And then there was always 2 on the rack, grading, picking out bruised, green. How come some of the beautiful looking potatoes were green?
Oh, they've been in the light.
Been in the light. Sometimes you did not have the modern equipment today to hill up the rows. And it was even tougher with horses, cultivators, hoes and cultivators. And if the potato grew close to the top, so a portion of it was exposed, it would be green. So if it had a little spot of green, it was good. But if it had that much, then they threw those out.
Green was bitter.
It was bitter. And the chemists, who I've never spoken to, have said that too much green, if you ate that, you got sick. So I never ate it. So yes, and there were some women that worked in the potato houses racking potatoes. So another job that the women do. There's still a couple of jobs that these early people had. Ministers, yes, yes. There was a doctor. Now, anybody hear stories about old Doc Thomas? He had a son that followed up, but way back there was a Dr. Thomas in Caribou, well before Dr. Carey that started the hospital. But let's go back to 1880 to 1900. If you're right here, how many miles to Caribou? 8 or 9? If you live in Gemplin, 13, 14, school land, 16, 17. So, in the 1880s to 1900, what kind of communication did these people have? Telegraph. Right in your home, of course. No. Where would the telegraph have been? General store, post office, and then a little later, phones. So, if somebody got hurt badly, they would call Dr. Thomas. So you stop and think about that. He had an active practice. He was seeing patients every day. I honestly don't know if 1890-ish, if there was a hospital in Caribou yet. Carey wasn't completed till, what, the 20s, I think, maybe, somewhere in there. So, they made home visits, or they wouldn't have had an income. So if somebody got seriously hurt or something happened, especially on the lines of a stroke or a heart attack or a seizure or something like that, if you lived not close to telegraph, you had to scamper, jump on the horse, or if you didn't have one, the horse and wagon to get to a telegraph and get a message. And then where's the doctor? Out on a house call, who didn't have his telegraph pager on his belt, so maybe you reached him, maybe you didn't. So the doctor, my mother and father told me a little about this, to get a message, try to communicate and get some information. And some of the stories say, well, they didn't show. Felt there was not too much they could do. And 1880 to 1900, you had nothing but horse or horse and wagon. So how long would it take to get from Caribou to here? 2 hours even. You'd have to average 4 or 5 miles an hour. That's a steady pace for the horse. If you're on the north end, it could take 3 hours or more. Okay. No 911 and GPS, so unless Mr. Thomas had a map and was a good map reader, I wonder how many times he rode around trying to figure out where the house was. So, we mentioned doctors. Did we have any nurses? I'm quite sure, because I have several relatives here, that I'm not sure if we have the most nurses in our family than within 2 miles. I had 4 or 5 relatives that were nurses. Safest place in America. So your mother, Nancy's mother, Janice, Kathy, Eileen's mother, my mother, Ebba Jepson in Stockholm, just up the road, Eloise Anderson, Evelyn Hedstrom, Doris Ringdahl, and I know I've left some out. So, were there early nurses in the first 20, 30 years? If they were unlicensed. They figured it out. Okay. Okay, we've still got a couple occupations you haven't mentioned yet. We've had shingle makers. Anybody have a cobbler, a shoemaker? Leather? You wish you did. Bring them back. There were. Some of the start was taking deer hides, cattle hides, scraping and tanning. And then they cut leather into shapes and made boots. Horse collars, bridles, all of that. They had to do that. Not a lot of documented history about the leather workers, but they had to have them. Caribou had quite a bunch. So what else have we left out? Nobody's still not taking notes. The quiz is at the end. Think about everyday life.
Did we say farmers?
Yes, we said farmers. Blacksmiths. Cobblers, shoemakers, there were. Coopers, yep. Those came.
We did.
But not potato barrels. That didn't come till 30 years after they settled and started shipping potatoes, but they had kegs and big barrels. What was in those barrels? If you say whiskey, I'm going to ask you for an explanation. Apples. But what was common that came from Caribou by horse and wagon a lot of times? In those big barrels. You've seen them. Flour. Definitely. What's that brown gooey stuff?
Molasses.
Molasses. Commonly used. So molasses, flour, and then if you bought or traded for a big barrel, like you said, apples, interesting story on that. There were, I don't know the situation of how many wild apple trees there would have been growing, but many of your ancestors planted small orchards. Not a tree or two, 6, 8, 10. My grandfather had a couple of orchards, one in the yard in the original homestead, and then back out on the farm there was another 8 or 10 trees. Not quite sure why he went that far away. I don't know, maybe he wanted to get away from my grandmother and have an apple, I don't know. But 2 different orchards. You had Johnny Appleseeds that would come by with bags of seeds, and people would take them. And so I don't know of any people here that sold apple seeds, but apples were very common once they got rolling with that. So back to the keg and the cedar barrels. The potato barrels were almost all cedar. How did they store them? Did they just dump a basket into the barrel and wrapped them in newspaper? And they used shavings again and layered them. So they wrapped them. They learned enough about different varieties of apples so that what they stored they referred to as winter apples. And they would. That would be starting in August into September, maybe a little later, where they picked apples and stored them in the basement where it was cooler. And my father told me that, you know, as late as April or May, he could still go down the cellar and get a fresh apple. So, what have we not covered?
Carpenters.
Carpenters. Yes, yes. So, you know the story that the Promised Land had a few broken promises. One of them was a place to live when you arrived. So the original group of 50 that actually had made it, how many were built? Nope, a few more than that. 6.5. 6.5. There was one under construction. Who was responsible for having those 25 cabins ready? WW, although State of Maine was directly responsible. As part of the deal to get the Swedes to come here, there would be a home.
Did they come here earlier than they expected them to get here? Or
It was pretty close to the time. And that was obviously today, the 23rd of July. So you still had summer weather. So you had 6.5 buildings built for 50 people. So do the math. That's almost 8 per house. And how big were those log cabins? 16 by 20? 8 people. You got to know each other. So, how did the rest of them get built? State of Maine? Bring their crew back? Nope. They were somewhere else. So they paid the early settlers, starting in 1870, and the next few years, because it actually was more productive. So they paid the early settlers $1 a day, which was a good wage at the time, to build their own home. My great-grandfather Per spent his first winter here. He arrived in June, I think, of 71, and his lot was 4.5, 5 miles up the road in Gemplin. And he came with 2 brothers, so they would pack up some food and water and walk from here to there, and a lot of times spend 2 or 3 days instead of going back and forth. It was 9 miles or more round trip. And they cleared You know the drill. You've heard the stories. It was a lot thicker than this. You didn't have a nice open quarter acre to put your house on. You had to clear all those trees. What did they do with a lot of the trees? Burned a lot of them. Used for lumber. You had NewSweden all over has what we call a mixed forest, hardwoods and softwoods. And they used softwoods, if possible, mostly fir and spruce, to cut logs, which they did entirely by hand. And they were chopping. Some simple saws came along, but it was a lot of chopping. So you look at that couple of those big maples right behind you, that's a lot of chopping. Okay. And hardwoods are 30% heavier than, so all by hand. And then, as Nancy said, to continue clearing, they burned the stumps. Now, a little later, horses were an absolute premium. W. Thomas rode on that great big white one that we all have seen pictures on. When I was a kid, I said, he's Moses. He had to be. He brought the Swedes to the promised land, so instead of taking them out of Egypt, he took them out of Sweden and brought them here. Big white beard. I don't know how many pictures of Moses I saw, but in my head. So he had a horse. I don't know that any of the first 51 settlers had a horse. They certainly didn't bring it from Sweden. Okay? So, what did they use to pull stumps, start tilling the land? They didn't have a horse. Oxen were fairly common. Sometimes they had mules. There were some mule dealers in Caribou Presque Isle, but oxen. Oxen were cheaper than a horse. So if they prospered as time went on, they got a horse, and then two. And if they did have an oxen or horses instead of burning, you had metal being used at the time. There would be a stump puller, great big hook, tied to the back of the horse, and drive that hook into the ground behind the stump and yank it out. And then they would move those stumps to a pile, and when they got X amount of stumps, they'd burn those. So a long, slow process. So any more jobs we haven't covered? We've got teachers and homemakers and cobblers and blacksmiths. Burley, state of Maine person, came up here about 2 years before the first settlers arrived and did a rough survey. Okay. So, we've talked about Mom and Dad. What about the kids? Who were they? What did they do? Played video games. Oh, no. Worked on the farm. Did they help clear land? They were big enough. My great-grandfather, Per, died in 1879, so he lived here for 8 years. The first cabin that he built up on the homestead on the Headman Road burned late in the fall. And so my grandfather was 14 at the time. But there were some crops and things to get ready for, and the story is, I'll take it as close to true as I'll ever know, is he worked long hours to rebuild. I don't know what they did in the interim, whether they lived with some neighbors, but he'd put in long hours and got quite sick, pneumonia, from what I can tell, and got sick enough and passed away. So my grandfather was a couple of months away from being 15, so he took on a lot of the responsibilities of his father, and my great-grandmother, that Miss Britta is named after, she and my grandfather finished the clearing and the rest of it. So another job so I'm guessing my grandmother had an extra job or two, but you did what you needed to do. So, where shall I go? Okay, back to the children. They helped clear land. Yep, if they were old enough. They learned to milk a cow once you got one. Absolutely. Women and children did a lot of the milking. I got to tell you this story about my mother. She was born in 1920 and lived in Stockholm. And my father had taken a fall. He misstepped on a ladder coming down out of not the hay loft, but the first level, and lost his footing and ended up on the trunk of the farm truck. Got some nasty bruises and was a little bit laid up. So I remember coming home from high school, and there was a note from my mother on the front door, and it said, "As soon as you get home, change your clothes and get in the barn." And her word meant something. So I did. Got into what we called barn clothes. Quite pungent. Got into my barn clothes and got out there, and we were milking 3 or 4 cows by hand at the time, and there's my mother on a stool, the 3-legged stool, with the silver stainless steel milk pail, and I was in awe. The milk was frothing in the pail, and if you were a good milker, you got a little foam and froth in the pail if you were a good milker. So I was probably mouth opened, and she turned when she realized I was there, and her first words were, "What are you looking at?" And I didn't have a reply, so she filled it in for me. She says, "When I was growing up, the girls did all the milking." So she says, "I've done this before." Okey doke. But another job that the women did. Men, of course, helped with all the canning. A lot of stuff. So back to the kids. They learned to milk cows, help clear land. Did they help plant garden and crops? Absolutely. Was there an age limit on it? Child labor laws? No such thing. So when the parent decided that you were old enough to learn and to help, that's what you did. So a little different than where it was. Okay. So I want to talk about a little bit about their homes. When things improved and they prospered, what were some of the homes and other buildings like? What did they graduate to?
Indoor plumbing.
Indoor plumbing. When did anybody have a rough time of when that arrived? 20s for some. Not for all.
No.
Into 30s and 40s. Maybe even 50s, but 30s and 40s, a lot of people did not have indoor plumbing. So they built what we'd call today farmhouses. Many of them big. I think some of the pictures, they used to be in the basement at Nylander Museum. Olaf Nylander actually went around Woodland, NewSweden, Stockholm, Westmanland, Perham, and took many pictures. Sprawling homes. How come they were so big? Family of 4 or 5 was normal, sometimes more. What happened to the grandparents when they were older? They go to long-term care? Nope. They stayed. The closest thing that we have to that today are the Amish. There's 200-300 of them in the area now. And you'll see an Amish house, and even in Pennsylvania and other places, it looks like this quite big house, a slightly smaller one here, and sometimes another one that's taking care of the elderly. And a lot of the houses were built here because grandparents kept living in the home or an addition. I don't know how the sons and daughters felt about that, but you learn to live with your in-laws or not, I guess. But that's what they did. Many bigger houses. Barns. I haven't run around Stockholm and NewSweden or Woodland and Perham, but the last time I tried to mentally keep track, there's only a handful of the traditional barns left. You don't know when that was built, do you? 20s, even before?
Before that, to the original part, the typical barn, but the wings on the side
Was added?
added.
Yep.
So maybe in the 30s.
Yep. Yep. So they were starting to build barns in the late 1800s. And the barns were for what? The animals, the hay, equipment. Yep. 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 We talked about the in-ground potato cellars that were common, but if you didn't have one of those and you didn't plant a lot, where did the potatoes get stored?
There's a whole cellar under there.
In the basement. No finished basements. The earliest were rock walls. My aunt Signe Olivenbaum on the Hedman Road and her husband Edgar, I remember when I was as old as they are, going over there sometime in the fall. I hadn't graduated to picking potatoes. If I'd known more about it, I would have held off my graduation. And there they were, rolling barrels across the porch and the kitchen floor. You had a trap door, so to speak, a rectangular or square hole in the floor, and they were dumping the potatoes there, which was not uncommon. There were quite a few people that did that. So they found a way, one way or another. And some of the barns were huge, and there were quite a few homes that burnt and barns burnt, and in many cases they rebuilt. But there were, if you went up and down Route 161 and all of the rest of the NewSweden roads, you would have easily counted 100 barns at one time. And I bet you there's less than 10 that are standing, probably. So, what shall I do as a wrap-up? We taking care of kids, taking care of the grandparents. They lived with their kids. We've hit most of the jobs that kept them going. Oh, we only mentioned storekeeper once, but I'll wrap it up with this. What was common business trade? Barter. What did the landowner, the original settlers, what did they have to barter? Yep. Right. They'd provide a service of some kind. But material things, what did they barter? Eggs. Produce. Yep. Some of them made a lot of those cedar shakes by hand, and there are stories in some of the books that talk about they'd bundle them up, take them here where the center of commerce was, or into Caribou and trade or barter them for what they needed. Meat.
You know, my grandfather, Soderbergh, had a store down across from the Covenant Church.
Right.
And I was born into that home. And my dad and mom were
Yes.
in the store until I was 4. And then an uncle took it over. But I remember opening the cooler, and there's this carcass hanging there.
Yep.
I don't think I ever went in that back door again.
Okay, I'm gonna change direction when you mentioned that with the carcass. We didn't mention meat cutters. There were people, meat cutters and butchers. Not everybody was the farmers were not real good at that. So you literally had men. It was a busy time in the fall, so you could store less cattle or pigs, and they went around and they would butcher in your barn. They have a block and tackle and whatever hanging from a big beam and do their butchering right there in the barn. There's another piggyback off that, and these were people who went around and specifically did that, and they do it any time of the year and come to your place and butcher a pig, cattle, whatever. So you had another spin-off of that where some people had to buy what would have been at the time quite expensive, and it has to do with getting a crop in. There was an old one on the Adamson farm. Aner Adamson and his father Walter. It may be still out there next to the wood somewhere. How'd you get the grain in? Way back it was with one of these. Sickle, scythe, cut them, bunch them just right, maybe tie. But you can't feed cattle the oats or barley. They tried a little wheat, not real successful. Our growing season's a little too short for a good crop of wheat. So how did you get the food, the oat seed, off the stalks? Thresher. They had big machines.
Yeah, and several farmers shared the same one.
Yes. That was another piece that was a seasonal job for people. Similar to when we were growing up, if you grew oats, you didn't have your own combine and you hired somebody to come in. They hired the thresher to come in. And what they would do is gather those stalks and load them on a truck or a wagon, bring them to the thresher, and they were in, and many of them were run by a big belt on a pulley, sometimes hooked to a tractor. That was a little bit later in the Industrial Revolution in NewSweden, but they would do that. So they would come by, and that would do similar to what a combine does. Now, the combines that came later, they cut them down, and when they went into the combine, the stalks were blown away into a separate area. It wasn't quite as much of a finesse thing with the old threshers. But they did. They went all over. Worked for weeks to get it in. So that was another job to make a living. They did it with potato machinery too. Yep. Yep. If you had a bit more mechanization, and especially if you finished, that practice was going on when we grew up. If there was a farmer that was a bit behind or something had happened and serious problems with equipment, neighbors came over and helped you finish. They brought their equipment and did all of that. So I had one more thing and I lost it. The wind is blowing. Let me see if I can get it back. The barter. Last story. My grandmother Ida, married to my grandfather Eric, did all of the things that you were talking about. Little segue there. I tried to get it out of my father and your mother, because they grew up with Eric and Ida. And because my grandfather married Ida when she was 18 and he was 34. So the question as we were kids visiting with Grandma was, wow, you were kind of young. Her first response, well, no, I wasn't. It was common. Girls to be married. We used to call it marrying off. At 17, 18, if you hit 20 and you weren't married, you know, I guess your value had decreased or something. So they got married, and we asked questions as time went on, and the story is that Grandma, who was a Swenson, her family was in the original group that started at the Covenant Church, and my grandmother's father knew that my grandfather was doing pretty well. He was prospering, had some success, and so he made a visit to my grandfather. And he says, you know, how are things going, Eric? Oh, pretty good. Yeah, he said, it seems like it. Looks like you're doing quite well. And a little chit-chat, and then he says, isn't it time for you to, you know the expression, get married and settle down? Which all of you who have been married and have kids, you know it never gets settled. Sorry. So, you know, time for you to get married and settle down. I'm not sure what my grandfather's immediate response, and then he moves into, well, I have a daughter who would have been 17 at the time. He was 33. And so the family story goes, he basically didn't commit, but said, well, I guess I'll think about it. And a short time later, paid a visit. He probably had to talk to my grandmother's father to make a visit, which was most likely on a Sunday afternoon, after church, of course. And then that was on the porch. And that's where you stayed. Bright daylight, sitting in a chair, maybe some lemonade, and my grandmother's here, and my father is quite a ways over there. And they made small talk. I don't know a lot of the other details, but long story short, I don't know, it was at least 6 months or longer he proposed, and she accepted. So I remember in the house that Eileen lives right now, because that's where my grandparents finished their stay in NewSweden. We were out there having one of these chats with my grandmother, and my sister Paula had looked at my grandmother and said, did you love him? She was high school age. Thinking, doesn't sound like the usual and customary practice. And my grandmother hesitated, and her response was, I learned to love. They were married 54 or 5 years. Hopefully that meant lots of love. So one last story about my dear grandmother. You know, Swedes have this reputation as being very frugal. And my mother wanted a nice dress, which they had at one of the Stockholm general stores. You had clothing stores and everything in Stockholm. And so she talked to my grandfather about that, and he basically said, what's wrong with what you got? She was not happy. So I don't know what she said exactly, but she said, I'm going to fix that. And she made butter. And they had the little wooden boxes that were a pound, and she made butter off and on for quite a while, and she'd get the horse and buggy, wait till my grandfather was out on the farm, or he'd just say, I got some errands to go to Stockholm, and she'd take 20, 30 pounds of butter at a time and put it on credit, because she said, don't sell that dress, I'm going to buy it. And they kept it, and she made enough money to buy the dress that Grandpa wasn't going to fork over the pengar for that. So then the rest of the story goes is she kept it wrapped and out of sight, and then it came Sunday morning, and she puts on the dress, sachets around just a bit so we can't miss it. And she said, how do you like it, Eric? I said, it's nice. She was probably saying in yes and no thanks to you. That's how they did it. So any questions? I've rambled. Never do. Okay. Thank you.
Can we come back tomorrow and hear the rest of the stories?
Oh, I'm doing some writing. Yep. So if you're able, if you can grab a chair when we get ready, I'll let Jessica finish up. I can take my truck down the road.
Thank you, John.
Yep.
So, yeah, we do have to bring the chairs back up when we're done. So please help if you can. Those of us who brought something to plant, we can plant those either. Do you want to do it before lunch or after lunch? How hungry are you? We can do it after. But we're gonna close out our time together with one of my favorite Swedish hymns, "Children of the Heavenly Father," and then we'll meet up at the museum. Can you start us off, Bertha?
Children of the